Hello everybody. So today we're going to be looking at Resident Evil performance and also looking at what the optimal settings I would say for this game are. So to start off, we are just going to be using the max quality preset, and this is at 4K. So straight away in this room here, our frame rate's about 80ish. This is while recording, 80 to 85. And we'll take a quick run around the hallways and then talk about some settings. So, oh, I forgot you're still alive. You notice there, when the enemy's a certain distance, the animations are actually 30 FPS instead of 60. Which is kind of annoying. Oh, what are you going to do? So, one effect here, you can see the lights coming through the door on the right hand side, this one here. That's photometric lighting, we'll talk about that in a sec. Then in here, if you're showing some books of those, we've got the shadow quality, which is pretty high, and we'll talk about that later. Frame rate's dipping down to like 70 now, 60s, 50, and then back in here, back in the 60s, 70, 80. I say this is on max settings, or what the game considers max. Now, I want to talk about first with the aliasing, because this game considers FXAA and TAA to be the max setting for aliasing, whereas SMAA, if I do this here, gives you a clearer image, because TAA usually either subsamples or kind of softens the image. So SMAA will give you a clearer image, so if you look at the dials on that, it's clear, but it's more aliased. You can see the fans rather aliased, but everything there looks clear and detailed, whereas what it considers max for aliasing is this one, and you can see there the detail's lost. It looks a lot softer in the image, but with this softness you also get a lot less aliasing because that fan is now a lot crisper. So personal preference on those, what you prefer. I keep it on TAA, well this one, just because I find less objects glistening from SMAA to be like less annoying, but SMAA does give you a clearer image, but sadly I don't think there's a perfect solution for this. You either have a soft image or you have bad aliasing, and none of the settings seem to affect that. Playing at 4K, you also still have too much aliasing with it off or with it on SMAA to really be happy with it. So sadly, I think this needs a little bit better aliasing, but that's the best we've got, is FXAA and TAA. As I said, personal preference though. So for the rest of the settings, texture quality scales pretty well. It gives you a graphics memory prediction. This seems to be pretty off, because you can see it says there we're going to be using 13.7 gig out of our 11 gig, but up here you can see we're only 9.3 at the moment. Then if you're ever struggling for VRAM, this is the setting I'd recommend changing first before anything else. It goes all the way down to like, it says low 0 gig, but it's obviously going to use something. You can't have no textures. Then anisotropic filtering, we'll just keep this on the highest setting. This barely ever affects performance. Mesh quality has 4 settings, so I don't think it really changes much in terms of performance. It might change slight quality, it's hard to tell. So you can see here we're like 70 FPS performance, and then if we go turn mesh quality all the way back up to max, we're at 69, 68, 69. So going from low to max, there's 4 different settings, but from the highest to the lowest is like, what's that, I don't know, about 3% performance, 2% performance. It's one of those where I honestly wouldn't worry about it. You can just leave it on max. It may cause some issues on lower end cards, I doubt it though. Then shadow quality, thankfully you've got all these pictures down here to give you a good idea. Shadow quality, I prefer, I think I was wrong on, I think on medium it's a bit too flickerish. So the best way to tell shadow quality is with the more dynamic shadows, which in this game you're going to get a lot off your torch, because you will be using your torch quite a lot in darker rooms. So if I shine that at the wall there, you can see the shadow's a bit aliased and there's a bit of flickering on it. Not too much. But we're at 78 FPS in this room, and if we turn shadow quality back up to max, shine a torch, like 77, and then zoomed out 75. So there's only, what, 3 FPS, so about 5% difference there. And that shadow does look a lot crisper, with no flickering. But for performance-wise, I'd recommend if you're going for a higher frame rate, but you don't want to sacrifice too much quality, leave this one on high, because you do get only a slight bit of flickering, but it's not too bad. And you do get a slight performance increase, which when stacked with other settings will all add up. So I'd recommend high for that one. Shadow caching, just leave that one on, unless you're having, like, if you have it on, it just reduces, just tells you here, reduces your CPU load. You only really want it off if, again, you're really struggling for VRAM. It only affects it slightly though. Then contact shadows, this one is pretty much best explained in the image. So for a lot of static items, like this box here, you can faintly see there's a shadow coming down there inside the box. And if you turn it off, shadows go. So it gives a kind of better sense of depth to items. And I'll give an example of how it affects certain things. So if we go out to where the picture is, which is out here, and we look down at this desk, you can see, like, you've got all these items, like the tub of pencils, all of this. That looks kind of standard, nothing special. And then if we come turn contact shadows on, you'll notice that, like, that's got a shadow, the pencil thing's now got a shadow, the lamp's got a bit of a shadow. So it gives a bit more depth to the scene. But in terms of performance though, we're looking at like 68, 69 FPS with it on. And then with it off, you're looking at about 73. So again, another 5% or more, a bit over performance boost. It's nothing massive, but again, this game is mostly about loads of little things in terms of performance stacking. There's only a few settings that really have a big effect on performance. One of the biggest ones is this one, screen space reflections. So what that's on about is you can see here how you got the reflection of the lamp, and it's like almost looks like the floor is wet, it's rather glistening. And then if you come over here, you see the bars on the statue at the bottom here, and you can see the reflection of the bars all along here. Now the way screen space reflections work, you can see there at the top of the screen it's now gone. If I bring it back, it just suddenly appears. Screen space reflections can only work on items that are within the screen, so nothing off the screen will be reflected. There are instances with this where you see like the door and the lamp and you'll be like, oh, but that's off the screen. That's because this isn't a screen space reflection, this is just all a preset reflection, so basically that's in the game regardless. It's something developers have learned to put into games to make it more realistic, to kind of cheat lighting systems in a sense. So let's look at the performance here. If we're looking at the bars here, we're at 69 FPS, and our gains from taking it off, you'll also notice there's a decent visual distance for this one. Different, because you notice in the picture there, down here you can see the box is reflected in the wet tiles, the shoes are glistening. You turn it off and it looks a lot flatter. But so it's at 69 and we've gone all the way up to like 77. So it's just over a 10% performance gain for turning it off. And if you come down here, see, like all this is still reflected because that's just a preset reflection. And then down here, you still get the light reflected, but it's a different type of reflection. So just for comparison, like looking at that, 95 FPS, and that's what it looks like. If we come and turn it back on, you still got it, but you see it's got the more glistening effect, and it's a softer reflection rather than a hard one, and we're down to like 84 FPS. It does give an increased look to scenes, like there's kind of reflections here on the tiles that looks more shiny, but it's kind of, I don't know, it's one of those, because it's not perfect, like it's not like ray tracing, it's nice, but so as soon as something goes off screen it could just like suddenly pop in, and it's not hugely accurate. Also it has bugs where, like, for example, you see the reflection, and once Leon's arm goes over it, you can see it disappears. That's a kind of weird thing that happens with screen space reflections, because the way just how it calculates it basically. So once an item or an object goes over it, it will make certain reflections disappear. You might notice this in other games. I know it happens in Final Fantasy 15, it happens in Battlefield, like with just normal screen space, not with ray tracing. Ray tracing fixes that issue, it stops that bug from happening, but it's kind of annoying, and that can be quite jarring. Like if you look at the reflection below Leon's right elbow there, you can just see it disappearing. And then if you just turn it off, you don't get that annoying effect. So while it looks better, I can say that side effect can bring you a bit out of the immersion. So going back into the graphics option, we turn it back on for now, and then we'll talk about it all off in a sec. Subsurface scattering, in the picture there, you might be able to tell like a slight effect. It's really just for models, like characters like Leon or Claire or stuff in cutscenes. And this one's really hard to tell, just because of the fact that you're rarely ever looking at skin in terms of like closely. You're either running past a zombie, shooting a zombie, you're not really, you know, admiring his complexion. So looking at Leon there, we're like 74 FPS, and that's with it off. And if you take a look at it with it on, see if you can notice much of a difference here. So there we go, put it on. We've lost ourselves again another like 5% performance, but personally I can't tell too much difference between the two. I just leave that one off. So just leave that one on for now. Volumetric lighting. Now this is best explained in the picture as well. You can see you've got the light shafts that appear, and I was talking about that with the door in the corridor earlier. So there's a good example, that example in the picture is that one up there. So if you come over here, if you actually zoom in to look at the effect, that looks pretty decent. Let's leave our crosshair in a stable position. So we're looking at 71 FPS, and that's what the rays look like. Now this setting does have a big performance hit, but I wouldn't recommend turning it all the way off, because turning it off, you get from what, 71 FPS all the way up to 85. If I zoom in, 71 FPS all the way up to 88. But I wouldn't recommend leaving it off. If you go one step up, you end up with that effect. So you have the volumetric lighting, but it's very low resolution, and it causes quite a bit of flickering. That one doesn't really affect performance too much, but I'd say the effect is a bit too rugged to really add much immersion. It just looks off. You can just look at it and see how that looks really fake. However, if you turn it up to medium, that is a much higher resolution, and our frame rate was what, 71 before, and it's 81 now. So you got yourself 10 FPS from turning that effect down, but the effect looks pretty much identical. So if I just leave it there for a sec, so take a good look at that, and then if we turn it back up to max, so we lost 10 FPS between medium and high, and there's not too much difference there. So that one is another setting I'd recommend just turning it down one notch. You're not going to notice the difference, but the frame rate you definitely will notice. Now, that one, particle light quality, I'd go to a different room to talk about that one. Ambient occlusion is your standard ones in here. You've got your SSAO, HDAO, and HBO+. And I'll also talk about that one in another room. And the last 6 effects, these ones are all post-processing. So they're all subjective, and they all barely affect performance. I have film noise off, I have this off, depth of field off, motion blur off, because it looks hideous. Lens flares, don't really care. Bloom I like on, because I don't know why, that just gives me a good like Resident Evil nostalgia. Like that reminds me of the REmake with the nice warm glowy lamps in the main hall. So if we take a detour back over to the room I was originally in, and we'll have a look at HBAO and... oh, that boy's alive. Better be dead now. See how bloody he is. He's taking so many shots. Right, so the sparkly effect is you'll see these little particles floating around in the room. That is the, what's it called? Particle lighting quality. It only has two settings, high and low, which translates to pretty much just being on and off. So there you can see there's no more little flickering particles, and we're sitting at like 94 FPS. And if you come down and turn it on, you can see they're flickering about, but now we're still at 94 FPS. It doesn't really change performance. That one's, it's weird. I'd say that one's another one where just take it or leave it, whatever you prefer, use that one. And then for ambient occlusion, we use that what, like 94 FPS roughly. If you come down to SSAO, you'll gain a mostly similar effect in most circumstances. Like, it won't be as accurate as HBAO. That is still the most accurate one at the moment, but your frame rate will improve. So we're looking at about what, 104 FPS now. Hey, ambient occlusion is one of those where how big the effect is really depends on the type of game and what environments you have. I find that one's more advantageous for games with a lot of grass, because it gives grass a lot of depth. Whereas environments like this, unless you're really looking for it, you're not going to notice too much of a difference. So let's put all these settings into combination now. So first of all, we will go back to our max preset and take a frame rate reading. And let's just look at the door knob, shall we? So looking at this room, max settings were at 85 FPS, and then when we ran over to the main hall we dipped down to like 60. So if we take my recommended settings for this, we'll leave this on FXAA and TAA. Leave these on those. That one doesn't affect too much. Shadow quality we shall bump down to high. Shadow caching leave on. Contact shadows we're gonna turn, yeah, we'll leave that one on. Screen space reflections, turn that one off. Subsurface scattering off. Photometric lighting, turn down one notch, leave it on medium. Particle lighting quality, leave that on high, it doesn't affect much. HPAO down to SSAO. Bloom we're leaving on, lens flare we're leaving on, motion blur off, this off, off, off. So these ones don't affect much, it's up to you. And now, our frame rate is all the way up to about 129, 130 FPS. And so keep in mind, this is at 4K resolution. So 135 FPS in there. Come back out to our main hall with our questionable friend. Don't get up. We're at 110. And so when we ran through here last time, we dipped down into like lower 80s, 60s. This time we're still over 103. The frame rate's a lot more stable. There's still that jutter you can see on the frame rate graph, but I think that's coming from the transition. There's another jutter there. But in this hall, we're now at like 100 FPS. I don't like the sounds coming from outside. And this is in one of the more lit up and demanding areas. So 106 FPS. So it's pretty phenomenal performance of 4K, especially considering I'm also recording. Also, my GPU's not overclocked. You can see my CPU's at 3.8 GHz. So if you want to tweak, there is room for performance here, improvement, sorry. We come into here, look 120 FPS, 140. Like 140 FPS at 4K is ridiculous level of performance. So if you're lucky enough to have a 4K 144Hz panel and a 2080 Ti, you could take full advantage of that on this game, which is nice to see. It's a really good port. Scared you. And myself. But yeah, so that's going to wrap up the look at this game, really. It's just a side note, because I usually play my games in ultra-wide. This game does support 21:9 pretty well. It also runs, as you expect, pretty well on like max or close to max. I was hitting about 150 FPS on that. If I use these settings on 21:9, I should imagine the frame rate will be higher. I have, in certain areas of this game where it's like less demanding than these big open rooms, managed to get to about 170, 180 FPS at 4K, so it's remarkable performance really, and it does look really nice. Anyway, I hope you found this guide useful. Let me know down below if you're going to use these settings. Just let me know what you're using and what frame rates it gets you. Right, thank you very much for your time.